And those of you watching, I am glad you're here. I hope this is going through okay. Looks like it is. I meant to make this an hour and 15 minutes ago. I have been getting over a cold, and so I'm a little delayed starting, but I wanted to jump in and do a monthly Wednesday Q&A. I'm trying to do these the second Wednesday of every month, and today is the second Wednesday of, what is it? Holy cow, September. It's going to be the holiday season before we know it. So I had a couple questions I wanted to address, and if anyone happens to join, then I welcome your questions, and I'll take those as they come in. So I've had a couple questions in the past. The first one is, how do credit cards work, and how do we use them? So if you are starting out in life, this channel is for young men growing up without a dad. So you're my target audience. You're the person I'm serving or trying to serve or help, because that's how I grew up. I grew up without my dad at home. My mom was great. I had older siblings, and I had friends, and I could watch their parents and see how they interacted. But I didn't have a dad in my life to show me some of the things that would have been very helpful if I had. So some of the questions that I get, like I said, are some of the questions I had when I was growing up. Credit cards was one of them. So if you got a question about credit cards, let's talk about that. Now, I have not done this before, and I don't know if there's a way. I'm sure there is a way, because I'm going to have to do it next time. Then I guess I'll have to use it as notes. I made some graphics in a slide, and I see two of you joining. If you're joining, that's fantastic. If you want to put in the chat where you're joining from, and I would also love it if I can tell if the audio is coming through. Hopefully it is. My voice might sound a little lower because I'm on the tail end of a cold. But let's talk about credit cards then. How do they work? Why do you want them? And what do you need to be careful about with credit cards? First of all, you may have people say that credit cards are good or credit cards are bad. Credit cards are like cars or like any other tool. They can be very helpful, and if you use it the wrong way, it can hurt you. So we want to avoid the credit cards hurting you. So first of all, when you're starting out and you want to get a credit card, most places aren't going to give you a credit card because you have no credit history. So where you want to start to get a credit card would be like with the bank that you have your account with. They will generally issue you a low limit credit card that you can use and start building your credit. So as you get a credit card, maybe a $500 limit, maybe 1,000, depending on how long you've banked there. If they've got history of how much, if you got direct deposit from your job and they can see that, then they might give you a little bit more. Use that responsibly. That's the first thing I would say, is use it responsibly. So use it, but use it responsibly. So if you want to make a purchase, these are not credit cards because I didn't want to hold actual credit cards up, my own, especially on a live stream. So, but these look like credit cards. It's a freaking flyer mile card from Delta. But when you get it, there's a lot of advantages you can have with credit cards. Most credit cards have benefits. If you spend so much, you get a discount. If you get enough points, you can get freebies back. All of that is great, but the real benefit is as long as you have the money to pay for what you're buying, you're getting extra time before you actually have to pay for it. So you could have up to 2 months of free use of whatever you've bought with your credit card, because you don't have to pay for it. If it's right after the close of the billing cycle that you charge something, then you get your statement 28 days later, and then it's not due for another 28 days. Well, you've got 2 months that you haven't had to pay for it. But that's also where the risk is. If you don't have the money to pay for it and you think, I'll have it then, I don't have it now, but I'll have it then you're setting yourself up for trouble. So you don't want to do that. Use it responsibly. When my wife and I first got married, maybe it was actually when we were engaged, I don't know, but my father-in-law flew into town, had to make sure that I was going to be okay for his daughter. But he gave us some advice, and some of it was really good advice. All of it was good advice, but he talked about credit cards. He made one comment. He said, don't think of it as a credit card. Think of it as a charge card. And his point was this, that you could pay for whatever you were buying on the spot out of your bank account if you wanted to, but you just chose to use this charge card and then you'll pay it later. His whole point was make sure you've got the money to pay for what you're buying with your credit card. So if you do have the money to buy something, why use a credit card? It's going to establish your credit worthiness. And that's going to be important going forward, particularly as you want to qualify to buy a car or get a car loan or a home loan. Those are the two main things that people usually get loans for. So your credit history is going to help you with that. A few things go into your credit history, but your on-time payment is one of them. So when you get a credit card, make sure you pay for it. You pay it when it's due or even a few days early. I usually set mine up in our banking bill pay for like the day before it's due, just to make sure they're electronic transfers. So they usually always go through, and I've got lots of history with that. So I'm comfortable with that. But if you're not sure, if you're putting, no one puts checks in the mail anymore, but if you were to put a check in the mail, you mail it early enough that it's going to get there. Well, the same concept, even if you're paying electronically, make sure you pay it on time or a day or two early so that you're protecting your credit history. All right, let's see. Interest rates. So if you do end up carrying a balance on your credit card, you've got to realize that that's an expensive way to buy stuff. Store credit cards, like if you go to a tire shop or a clothing store, let's say you go to Nordstrom to buy some clothes and they have a store credit card, they may have a slightly lower interest rate. Actually, theirs would probably be higher. But regardless of which one it is, you got to know what your credit card interest rate is. Because if you end up paying interest on it, which I highly, highly encourage you not to do, it's going to be a lot more expensive buying stuff with it. Now, if you're in a situation where you know you can pay it off in 2 or 3 months, then just make sure you know what the credit card interest rate is, and you always want lower. That's the lowest interest rate, just in case. Some credit cards charge an annual fee. I've never had a credit card that charged an annual fee because I'm not going to pay for the privilege of them getting money from my transactions, because a credit card company gets like 2% or 1.5 or some percentage of what you buy from the vendor, from the store. The store actually gives that much to the credit card company. So they're making money on your purchases. And so they don't need to charge me, or I'm not going to pay an annual fee to have that. So those were some of the pointers I had about credit cards. So hopefully that helps. I wish I'd had some graphics ready. I got to figure out how to do that on YouTube streaming. But for those of you joining, I would love to see you in the chat. Let me know where you're joining from. And if you've got any questions you want to throw in here, then drop them in the chat and we'll see what I can do. I'll do my best to give you the stepdad answer for them. All right. So I had one more thing. With credit cards and credit in general, you are developing a credit history and a credit score. In the United States, we have 3 credit reporting agencies, Equifax and a couple of others. In Canada, there's 2 of those 3 are also prevalent in Canada. What those companies do is vendors report to them your on-time payments. If you've got a credit limit of $5,000 and you're at $4,900, they report what your balance is against your credit limit. If you're making mortgage payments, if you got a loan or car payments, those banks report your payment status to those credit agencies, and they keep track of your credit history and generate a credit score. In the US, the maximum score I think you can have is 850. Average is probably around 600. You'll want to know what your credit score is. Credit Karma, I think, is the one. I used to use Mint, and Credit Karma bought Mint, or vice versa. Or anyway, Credit Karma is one way you can get it. You can get a free your credit history report annually free by reaching out to those agencies, filling out a form, and they will give you your full credit history, or they're supposed to give you your full credit history and your credit score number. Again, that relates to credit cards because you're building that credit history, and you want to have a good credit history. If you do all cash when you're buying stuff, it's harder for a company to determine whether you're credit worthy or not. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's not too much info about this, but don't max out your credit card. Use it responsibly. Always pay it on time. But it's not a bad thing to get one and use one, but you've got to have the self-discipline to use it well. Okay. Um, that's a good point too. Tango Foxtrot. Most banks, if you log on to your bank account, you can see what your credit score is. There's usually always a link that says "Show me my credit score," and it will give it to you from one of the three agencies. I've had a couple of different bank accounts, and some of them used different agencies to get their numbers from, and they're close. They're not always the same, but they're close. All right, so that was one of the questions. How do you use credit cards? What advice do you have about credit cards? And that's pretty much what I wanted to answer for that. Now, I had another question that came up, not related to credit cards. I guess it could be in a joking way, but relationships. I had a question come in about how do you know if you're with the right person? Navigating relationships can be tough and challenging and exciting and fun. I mean, most of us don't want to go through life alone. So it's important that we develop the skills and abilities to have a relationship. So how do you know if your girlfriend or whoever you're with is the right person for you to be with? That was the question. So I thought about that, and I had a number of questions that I would ask you that will help you determine the answer to that question. If you're in a relationship and you've been in a relationship for a little while and you're still not sure, is this the right one? Here's some things you can ask yourself. Are you a better person when you're with her? If you, and better than what? Okay, so what does that mean? You probably know yourself, whether you raise your standards, your behavior, your internal I don't know, behavior. I mean, how good are you with when you're with her versus when you're not with her? Do you cut yourself more slack? Do you behave slouchier? Do you use vocabulary that you wouldn't use if you were with her? If you raise your standard of living, and I'm not talking about the kind of car you drive and the kind of clothes you wear and stuff like that. I'm talking about your character. If your character is better when you're with that person, that's a very good indication that you're with a good partner. Okay. Now, you may not feel like that's always true, but generally, and for most of the time, answer that question. Are you better when you're with her? Another question you can ask yourself that will help you determine whether you're with the right person or not. If you look into the future as far as you can think and see yourself with that person, do you see it as a positive light or as a, wow, why did we do this, but we're still together? Unfortunately, I know couples that have been married for longer than my wife and I have been, which we'll be married 34 years this year. They've had kids. They're still legally married. They don't even stay in the same bedroom. They have the same house. They just don't want to get divorced because it's too complicated. Or family impact or whatever else. Very, very sad scenario, because I almost think you'd be better off ending that and trying again, because much of the happiness that you're going to get from life comes from that intimate relationship that you're going to have with your spouse. So if you look into the future as far as you can imagine and you see yourself with her, is that a positive thing or not? Now, it's probably difficult to do that objectively if this is a newer relationship, but if you've been in it for a while, do that exercise. Look into the future, see how you would see you and her in a relationship, and if it's a good thing or a bad thing. So that's a second question you can ask yourself. Are most of your values and interests common? So if you've been dating for a little while, hopefully long enough that you can answer those questions and know whether or not your values or interests are common, then ask yourself that. And when you're dating, sometimes differences seem exciting, right? But in the long run, if you don't have most things in common, um, family background, socioeconomic levels, religious backgrounds, political backgrounds, expectations for life, family values. If those things don't largely overlap, I mean, maybe not completely, but mostly overlap, then that might be a challenge for you going forward. And that could be a big risk in a long-term relationship, in a marriage relationship. So are most of your values and interests common? That's another question you can ask. Have you ever been through a conflict together yet? If you've been through a conflict together, how did you deal with it? If it was ugly and you gave it some time and you came back together and ignored it, that's not a good indicator. If you had a conflict, a disagreement, an argument, and yet you came back together and dealt with it responsibly and maturely, talked through the differences, came to some agreement and a way to deal with it going forward, that's a much better indication. Now, that's an indication of the level of maturity that both of you are at in the relationship and as individuals. But if you have had difficulty and you're ignoring it and pretending it never happened, that's not a good indicator, because if you make a larger commitment and go forward and difficulties come up, you've got to know how to deal with those and deal with them maturely. All right, one last question that I had that I thought, this is more an internal question for you. So if you're in a relationship, you're not sure if you're with the right person, answer for yourself, why are you attracted to her? If you just don't like to be alone on the weekends and she's someone fun to be with, that is nice, but that's not someone that necessarily would be a long-term partner. You'd be answering all those other questions too, like, are your interests common? But if you're attracted to her for some reason like that, and only that, then that's probably an indication that you ought to be thinking about maybe dating other people too. Those are just some of the thoughts I had off the top of my head when I got that question that I would share with you. I wanted to pop those up here, and I got to practice how to do this and share screen. This is what happens when you get a stepdad doing a live stream on YouTube. All right. So for those of you joining, I'm glad you're here. I grew up without my dad, so I would have appreciated, and I did appreciate, having other people's dads, other dads that were helping me as I grew up. The one in particular, his name was Mark Gould. I wrote a book about some of the lessons that you can learn that I think will help you if you are a young man growing up without a dad that you might be missing out on. There's a link in the description for this. You can check it out if you want on Amazon. I'm going to end this with a random dad joke. My wife put a bunch of, she didn't call them dad jokes, but she put a bunch of jokes in here that we used at a family gathering once. I got to get the stepdad glasses on for this. All right. Why did the birds attack the dog? He was purebred. That's why they're dad jokes, I guess. Well, I'm glad you joined this live stream. I hope you know you can still succeed, even if your dad's not in your daily life, and you do have a dad that loves you. And I'll see you on the next video.